So good morning. My name is Sharon Main. I'm the Director of Climate Resilience at the Community Environmental Council. Welcome to our Climate Resilience Roundtable, Community Solutions to Protect Against Climate Change. We will have this webinar available in Spanish interpretation this morning. So I'd like to introduce Nayra Pacheco and Aliz Ruvalcaba, and they're going to help us understand how to set up the channel.
Gracias. Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Aliz Ruvalcaba y mi cointérprete es Nayra Pacheco. El CEC mantiene un compromiso fuerte para la creación de espacios de justicia lingüística, para que más de nuestra comunidad puedan participar. Por este motivo, la reunión del día de hoy será interpretada simultáneamente en inglés y en español. Así que, por favor, escuche en el idioma que más se siente cómodo y cómoda. La presentación de diapositivas estará disponible en ambos idiomas.
Good morning. My name is Nayra Pacheco and my co-interpreter is Aliz Ruvalcaba. CEC has a strong commitment to creating multilingual language justice spaces so that more of our community can engage. For this reason, this meeting will be interpreted simultaneously in English and Spanish, so please listen and speak in the language you are most comfortable. The PowerPoint presentation will be available in both languages.
Puede escribir sus comentarios, preguntas en el idioma de su preferencia.
You can write your questions or comments in the language of your preference.
Si usted es bilingüe, por favor no cambie de idioma en la misma oración y asegúrese de hablar en el canal de idioma adecuado para asegurar que lo que se diga o se escuche o se interprete en el canal sin audio original.
If you are bilingual, please do not switch back and forth between languages in the same sentence and make sure to speak in the appropriate language channel to ensure you are heard or interpreted for, or choose original audio.
Se da la bienvenida a contribuciones al grupo entero.
Contributions from the entire group are welcome.
La función de interpretación ya está activada. Si está llamando a través de una línea telefónica, no podrá acceder a los canales de interpretación. Así que, por favor, conéctese con la aplicación. Si usted está en su computadora, verá aparecer un globo en la parte derecha de su pantalla. Si está en tu teléfono celular, va a haber un menú de 3 puntos en la parte inferior al lado derecho de su pantalla. Haga clic ahí y presione en Interpretación de idiomas. Seleccione el idioma que desea escuchar la presentación. Si por algún motivo el audio original suena más fuerte que la voz del intérprete, en cualquier momento puede silenciar el audio original.
The interpretation feature is now activated. If you are calling through a phone line, you will not be able to access the interpretation channel, so please switch to the app. If you are on a computer, you will see a globe pop up on the bottom of the screen. If you are on your phone, you will see 3 dots on the bottom right-hand side. Click on these and select the language you speak. If for some reason the original speaker sounds louder than the interpreter you are listening to, you can mute the original audio at any moment.
Creamos estos espacios con el apoyo de todos y todas. Favor de comunicar cualquier problema en el chat.
We create these spaces with everyone's support. Please communicate any issues by chat.
Gracias. Ahora podemos activar la función.
Thank you. We may now begin.
Great. Thank you, Nayra and Aliz. Looking forward to it. And just a reminder to our presenters today, please slow down, speak clearly, and take pauses so our interpreters can keep up with our speedy language. So just a few quick things before we get started. The webinar is being recorded. We'll make the recording available on our website later. Instructions and other need-to-know information will be in the chat in both English and Spanish. If you need assistance or have comments or questions, you may also put that in the chat. If you have questions of our speakers today, put those in the Q&A section. We will be taking a few questions after our keynote discussion. And if there are questions we can't answer live, we will try to address those in the follow-up of information that we'll send out after the webinar. As we begin today, it is important to recognize that we inhabit the unceded land of the Chumash. Please join me in acknowledging the Chumash Nation and its bands of this region, their elders, past, present, and future generations. Many of our organizations, institutions, and practices were founded upon the exclusion and erasures of many Indigenous peoples. We hope that we can begin to dismantle the legacies of colonialism so that we can seek a healing path for all people. We welcome the Indigenous wisdom and participation of our Chumash siblings, and we thank you for your long stewardship and care of these lands. Great, so let's begin this morning. Again, welcome to the Climate Resilience Roundtables, Community Solutions to Protect Against Climate Change. I am Sharon Main, Director of Climate Resilience at the Community Environmental Council. I'd like to take a few moments and orient you to the Roundtable series and provide a few highlights. Today's event is the final in a series of roundtables that CEC has hosted. They've been funded by local partners and guided by an expert steering committee. Over the past 15 months, we've explored the climate threats to the region through these roundtables. We brought together community leaders and partners from different sectors in order to begin thinking and working at the intersections of climate change. That's public health, social justice, the economy, and the environment. The roundtables were based on the 6 climate threats identified for our region. That's increased fire, sea level rise, heat, drought, extreme storms, and reduced snowpack, which impacts our water supply. The first roundtable, many of you may have attended, was in November 2019. It was on wildfire and smoke. It was followed by sea level rise and flooding on March 4th, 2020. And this, of course, was just a week before the global pandemic was declared and we went into our first quarantine. Of course, we have just passed the 1-year anniversary of that. These first 2 events were in-person gatherings, but in that post-pandemic world, we had to reinvent the roundtables in a virtual online platform. This is also a time for us to have reflection. And given that one of the primary goals of these roundtables was to engage more diverse voices and to identify gaps and needs in local climate planning, we found this to be the opportunity to shift the focus of these roundtables to really the compounding climate impacts on vulnerable populations and frontline workers. The first of these was in August of last year. It was vulnerability, health, and equity. And the second was in September, and it was stories of resilience from the front lines of climate change. This last roundtable was really particularly impactful and critical to the culmination of this roundtable series. For many of the attendees, it was a real shift in awareness and understanding of equity, justice, and inclusion, and how we as a community are doing our climate planning work. With the leadership of our partners from the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, this event focused on stories of people living on the front lines of climate change every day. Those who are disproportionately impacted being the outdoor and essential workers, marginalized people, and communities of color. This was also a Spanish first event. This would ensure that our native speakers felt safe and respected sharing their stories in this space. And if it wasn't already clear, it became crystal clear after this event. Climate resilience is only possible if we have a just and equitable approach that considers all people, particularly those most vulnerable and on the margins. Next slide. At each roundtable, we did a series of table level and breakout group exercises with prompts that get people thinking about resilience from the personal level to the neighborhood scale and to a whole community approach. We collectively generated bold ideas and core principles that are needed for a just and equitable climate resilience in Santa Barbara County. These ideas were upvoted by the room and put into what we call an opportunity matrix. And these are available on our website, so you can go take a look at all of them. All told, we gathered over 700 community generated ideas from these 4 roundtables. At the first roundtable, the wildfire and smoke, we heard from fire and health experts about the changing nature of modern day fires and their impacts in this climate changed world. We had officials from Montecito Fire, a retired fire chief from the US Forest Service, and others that really helped us dig in. And one of the top ideas from this event was around community empowerment and readiness at the neighborhood level. Developing resilience hubs and strengthening networks was a key theme, which will appear throughout the roundtables. Other ideas included fuels management, home hardening, and other land uses to protect us in the wildland-urban interface. Next slide. At the Sea Level Rise Roundtable, we had a demonstration of virtual reality tools to see what the future of sea level rise projections would look like for coastal communities. It was very powerful. One of the top ideas from this event, no surprise, was to use innovative tools and approaches to engage community members to help them better understand and grasp the realities of sea level rise impacts. I find it ironic that we had to use virtual reality to help people grasp the realities of it, but sometimes that's how it has to happen. There were other top ideas, of course, nature-based solutions like living shorelines and sediment management. Next slide. At our Vulnerability, Health, and Equity Roundtable, we focused on public health. And Dr. Linda Rudolph of the Center for Climate Change and Health stressed the disproportionate impacts of climate change on low-income, frontline, and vulnerable communities. We also heard stories from workers experiencing heat in the field, from homelessness in a disaster and what that's like, and even discrimination and barriers faced by a multi-generational family who was trying to build back after the fires. Of course, aligning with public health on climate resilience goals was a key theme coming out of this roundtable. Next slide. And our final roundtable, Stories of Resilience, we heard stories of of the struggles and resilience of local people dealing with the compounding impacts of climate disasters and a health crisis, from harsh working conditions and having to put themselves and their families at risk to earn a living, to having information available in their language or not having it available in their language during disasters, or feeling unwelcome and discouraged from accessing beaches and parks, places that are really important to cool off during extreme heats. This roundtable really highlighted the need to break down the barriers that prevent people from being able to take action, from being part of the community planning effort. And that is, again, a key theme. The top idea from this event was for governments and planners to have meaningful and accessible, culturally competent engagement processes. So I'm going to wrap up and just give you some highlights for what we're going to hear about today. Again, with over the 700 data points that we collected from the roundtables, we needed to make sense of this all. So our team spent months sifting through all of this roundtable data and doing a deeper analysis of the key principles, themes, and values that are necessary for climate resilience. And we'll dive into that in just a few moments. Today, we're also going to have a conversation with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research on how we might align local climate resilience efforts with their priorities and potential funding opportunities coming down the pipe. We'll also have an opportunity to look at those top 50 ideas that I mentioned from all of these roundtables and even upvote those that maybe are most compelling to you or that you feel are really priorities for our community. And finally, we'll consider structures for working more effectively in collaborations and with networks in order to set in motion implementation of community-driven solutions. So the webinar will end at 11:30, and those who signed up for the afternoon breakout session, we will reconvene at 1. You will be sent a link for that a little later, and we'll also have it available in the later on at the end of this webinar. So as a reminder, we will be taking questions of our keynote speaker in the Q&A. If you need any help or need assistance, just let us know, put that in the chat. And we've also posted the agenda for today in English and Spanish, so you may take a look at that. So now I'm going to pass it on to our presenters. I'm going to start with Carl Palmer, and Carl is with the LegacyWorks group, a local nonprofit that convenes, facilitates, and manages collective initiatives. And this is really important element because sometimes no single organization can take these on their own. And so having this convener is such a valuable tool. And LegacyWorks and Carl has been a key facilitator, presenter, and co-creator of these climate resilience roundtables. And we couldn't have done it without his guidance and support. So Carl, over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. If there was any doubt, the importance of building resilience is crystal clear after convening this series together. We started 2 Novembers ago with smoke in the sky over direct relief. We're disrupted in March by a devastating global pandemic that's since taken the lives of 500,000 Americans and laid bare the structural inequities in our economy and society. And we endured a second wildfire season of an intensity that we couldn't have imagined just a year ago when we convened our wildfire roundtable. The need is crystal clear, but the question really is how do we go about building resilience in the face of these daunting challenges and compounding crises? Those challenges require collaboration across sectors at a pace and scale beyond anything we've yet even attempted. They require building trust, shared vision, social cohesion, collective capacity. And that in turn requires empowering everyone in our communities to show up with their whole selves and all their gifts, inviting them into leadership to be a part of the solution. And perhaps above all, the crises we face require taking bold action together with urgency, not trying to figure it all out at the front, but getting going and learning by doing. We believe that this is how we need to do the work, and that the how is just as important as what we do. And we'll get to the what later. So we developed a set of shared principles and key insights from the roundtables that can guide our shared journey moving forward as we build community resilience. And we'd like to invite a few members of our steering committee to share those insights with you today, starting with Chris Ragland of Healing Justice and Black Lives Matter, Santa Barbara.
Thank you so much, Carl. It is an honor to be here and to be a part of this process. I'd like to start by introducing three themes: equity building capacity, and fostering leadership. Next slide, please. So you may have seen this picture before. I use this picture as a creative exercise. Climate change affects everyone, though they may not be aware of it or just don't care about it as much as they care about baseball. Fair enough. But it's important to acknowledge what activities and sectors are influencing culture in the United States, because ultimately that's what will captivate the hearts and minds of people, the folks that we're talking about today, or the folks that are intersected. For my work, that looks like building relationships between people and the environment that we're expecting them to care about. So what I'd like for you to do is substitute the height of the individuals for the history of oppression amongst minority groups in the United States. And please neglect the fact that all three of the folks in this image are brown, because that's not our reality. It's important to acknowledge that equity ain't equal. Here we see the tallest person will be able to see what's happening. And in the context of the discussion today, on the other side of the fence, that's a flood, that's a fire, that's people poisoning water. Where we are now, the resilience, the preparedness of the shortest person, that symbol for our intersected communities of color, relies on others to relay that message to get ready. Considering hurricane season in the South, that's not enough, that's not working. So go back to the boxes. You need money to make boxes. At the very least, you need wood, nails, hammers, and hands. So when we talk about building capacity, what we mean is having the resources to address those challenges that we know are coming. And the question is, are we making the boxes? Or are we teaching them how to build the boxes? Or are we just putting folks on our shoulders? So more than money, we need intel. That's why we're here. We need to know what we need. And lastly, where are the leaders in this image? They're everywhere. They're actually everywhere. They're the captains on the team encouraging their players to stay focused, keeping the morale high. There's the leader that gave up their box so that the smaller person can watch the game. Leaders in the stands trying to get people to do the wave. There are leaders in the stands that don't know that they're leaders. So part of this work is uplifting folks to see their potential and step into those leadership roles. And more than anything, I believe we need to be creative and see that in every moment, there is actually an opportunity to move the needle. So thanks for having me, folks.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next, Teresa Romero of the Santa Ynez Chumash Environmental Office. Teresa, if you will, please turn your video on.
Haku, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. And I wanted to talk a little bit about resiliency as it pertains to the entire community and the Indigenous and tribal communities that may surround you. And I want to start with UNDRIP, and that is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And Article 3 talks about self-determination, which includes the right to freely determine their political status, that's Indigenous people's political statuses, to freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And then there are many articles in the Declaration, but Article 26 states specifically that Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, and otherwise used or acquired. In addition, here in the United States, the tribes also have self-determination, and the federal government has a trust responsibility to tribes. And it really is imperative when we talk about resiliency planning to include tribal and Indigenous peoples as part of your planning processes. And as Indigenous people and tribal peoples, we have experiences and knowledge that can really benefit the entire community. And some of those are traditional practices, seasonal changes that we see when we're out doing our gathering of medicines, plants, and foods, as well as our traditional tending practices that could also build resilience in community, especially in terms of wildfire. And there's many tribes in the state of California now that have returned fire to their lands in collaboration with outside agencies and are doing cultural burning in the state of California, which helps build wildfire resiliency along with prescribed burning. And really what's important here is that we work in a collaborative way, because together we have shared answers and knowledge that can really build resiliency for our entire community. And has been mentioned before, climate change affects the entire community, not just one pocket of a community. And so it's really, really important to have our voices work together. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Teresa. And now Michelle Sevilla from Office of Assembly Member Steve Bennett.
Thank you so much, Carl. Other themes and priorities that were uplifted by attendees of these several past resilience roundtables included heavy focus to address and focus our attention to the intersections of our problems that and the challenges that we face. It is impossible for us to remain or work solely on a single issue. Our work and our challenges are intersectional, interdisciplinary, and interorganizational. And so solutions and planning and mitigation must be likewise. This requires integrated, holistic, and networked approaches. We must prioritize projects that are focused at these intersections with the goal to create and generate multifaceted impact and community benefit, and to build the skills and experience needed to work in these very complex arenas. What was also uplifted in resilience is that it must begin at the local individual scale. It begins at the relational level, resilience between individuals, families, neighbors, and neighborhoods. And our future investments must be made in this social foundation first, and in parallel with large-scale physical infrastructure that supports equitable and greater connectivity within and between our communities. And finally, we must redirect our resources wherever possible, from top-down expert consultants to localized solution building, which are facilitated by local partners, but very much tapping into and utilizing the local expertise that we have all throughout all our pockets of our community members, found in all social and economic strata. And finally, again, solutions must be rooted in local wisdom. And we must focus on generating positive externalities like building capacity, agency, empowerment, and building and sharing leadership and power. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And finally, Garrett Wong of Santa Barbara County Sustainability Division.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I am the county's climate program manager, and it was my pleasure to be a part of this roundtable series, not only as a steering committee member, but also as a participant. It's been extremely valuable for me to be able to sit at the table in the virtual rooms and listen to community members and really connect with individuals and participants who are both on the front lines and both who are really working at multiple levels to make sure that our community is prepared and resilient and more prosperous going forward into the future. And so some of the learnings that I've taken away and that I'm hoping to continue to infuse into my work and into the work that my colleagues do at the county level are to re-envision the way that we perceive our role to be. The county, we recognize that as a local government, we don't have the answers nor all the resources to do everything that we think we can. We have to really work with our partners. We have to find new partners, and we need to build the capacity of our community to take on some of the work and build the resources that are necessary from the ground up. We're starting to do this in small ways. We have an equity advisory and outreach committee, which is a diverse group of community stakeholders and representatives who come from or work with marginalized and underrepresented and under-resourced communities and populations. And they're helping to guide and shape and shift the county's approach to climate planning and programs. We also have launched last year at the first Climate Resilience Roundtable, the Santa Barbara County Regional Climate Collaborative, which is a new and growing multi-sector network of public agencies, organizations, other entities and individuals who are coming together to solve our region's complex climate challenges and develop climate solutions that will serve our needs locally. We recognize that we need to align our plans and work efforts in order to ensure that we're looking at the same issues, identifying the same solutions, and also making sure that we're leveraging common resources. And one way we're doing this is by the county's initiative, the One Climate Initiative. We're in the midst of planning of our new climate action plan, updating our safety element, and creating a new active transportation plan, all of which will have tremendous impacts for the community as we go into the future to planning for a more low carbon and climate resilient Santa Barbara County. And One Climate provides us with the opportunity to really broaden the conversation, bring in more participants, and hopefully elevate the awareness and enthusiasm that people have for making our community a better place. And finally, we need to make sure that we're all prepared for resources. We know funding is always tight and capacity is always limited, but as the state of California and the federal government have clearly stated now that climate is a priority, that economic recovery is a priority, that community well-being is a priority, that these are issues that are critically going to be funded and targeted by the state and federal level. We need to be prepared for those resources. As grant opportunities and funding resources come and go, we must be competitive, we must be prepared, and we need to be adequately resourced in order to take advantage of these. So we try to provide as much support as we can to make sure that our partners are capable and interested when these funding opportunities arrive. One small example of that is we recently partnered with the Isla Vista Community Service District, one of our newer community service districts in the county. And they recently were awarded up to $200,000 to develop a community sustainable mobility plan. In this community, an unincorporated community has never had a community plan before, so this will be their first. And we look forward to exploring more opportunities with all of our partners across the county. If you'd like to learn more, I'll share a couple links into the chat, and we'll look forward to taking the learnings from this series and starting to integrate them into our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Chris, Teresa, and Michelle. What's really clear is that if we're going to build resilience, we need to expand leadership. And our steering committee, quite a number of you are here with us as attendees today as well, who are not participants. We're really grateful for your leadership, for what you brought to this series, and grateful to all of you as participants for showing up as community leaders as well. It's going to take all of us coming together, operating with these, under these sorts of principles and with these insights, as Chris, Teresa, Michelle, and Garrett so ably shared. Thanks very much. Now, it's my pleasure. Sigrid Wright, Executive Director of the Community Environmental Council. Sigrid and CEC are playing key leadership roles in our community's response to the climate crisis. Thank you, Sigrid.
Thank you, Carl. I'm very glad to be here. This has been a very illuminating year and a half or so, 15 months of resilience roundtables. I'm appreciative of everyone who's been showing up to those. It's my pleasure now to have a conversation with Nuin-Tara, who is the Deputy Director for Climate Resilience at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research for the state of California. Nuin-Tara is the chair of the Technical Advisory Council for the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program. It's a big mouthful. Prior to joining the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, Nuin-Tara co-founded an international initiative on community-based climate action, and she has worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors on sustainable urban and regional planning and policy, with a focus on social equity and climate change. So she's right up our alley. Nuin-Tara has a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning from Portland State University and a Bachelor's of Art from Lewis and Clark College. So welcome, Nuin-Tara. It's good to see your face again.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation.
All right. We're glad you're here. There's a lot happening. And I want to get into it. I want to talk about what's happening in your office, what's happening at the state level. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening, what we can expect to happen at the federal level. So let's just start with, maybe you could briefly bullet out the Office of Planning and Research's climate-related priorities this year. What's new? What do we need to know?
Yes, well, thank you just for the invitation here. It's wonderful to join this conversation, and I really want to thank everybody who's joining here today for your tremendous work that everyone is doing in your communities in these unprecedented times. And so really a huge thank you to everybody for everything you're doing every day to make California communities stronger and healthier. So thank you all. I also want to thank the organizers for pulling together what is already just an amazing and inspiring event here today. And thank you to all the previous speakers for sharing such wonderful and amazing themes that have come through your work. There are so many synergies across what the speakers just went through and are looking at as well. So OPR's role, for those who may not know, I'll give a very high level kind of overview and then dig into our climate resilience and adaptation and other priorities. OPR, kind of big picture, we are the state's land use planning entity. We also serve the governor and the cabinet on long range planning and long range kind of thinking issues. So this includes climate change, and climate resilience. It includes work, emerging work that has come through over the last couple of years, really focusing on just transition and thinking about how we prepare communities for the transition to a carbon neutral and resilient economy and communities. And I'm going to slow down a little. I think I got a note to slow for the interpreter, so I will work on that. So that's our big picture. In terms of our role on resilience, I want to just take kind of a step back and say that we take a very broad view on resilience, again, aligning with a lot of what the speakers just prior to this conversation shared, where we are thinking about resilience as a systems approach. So to address the impacts of climate change, we have to be thinking about resilient built systems, resilient social systems, resilient natural systems, and how they all fit together within communities. The other highlight that I want to make is that we in this administration have really been trying to drive on an all of government approach to climate. So rather than thinking of climate as something in the abstract or some separate issue that needs to be addressed independently, we really need to be thinking and building towards a place where climate is just part of both building climate mitigation actions and climate adaptation is just a part of how we as government do business and as communities are approaching work. Central to that is also recognizing that our climate strategies have to also be fully integrated and one in terms of addressing underlying inequities and identifying solutions that are driving to resolve those as well. I think many of the speakers before really hit on this and just wanted to flag that that is central to how we also approach our adaptation work. We will not succeed in building resilience if we're not supporting communities to achieve our equity goals as well. So in terms of our work, last quick thing here, and then I'll hand it back to you, Sigrid, is that we have a couple elements of our work that we really drive on. One of those in our office, we have the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, or ICARP, and our colleague Juliette Hart is on. I know she'll talk a little bit more after I'm done here about that. But through that, we really serve as the hub for interagency coordination and resilience on adaptation. And as part of that, we are really focused on how do we help communities on the ground build capacity, providing technical assistance, guidance, but also really helping to serve as a convening role and supporting the value of convening and collaboration. We've been focusing a lot over the last few years around funding alignment, so I'm happy to talk about that a bit. And then really thinking about how do we drive on implementation and how do we support and create an enabling environment so that we're actually able to implement on the ground. I will stop there. There's lots of detail that we can get into, and there's a lot of priorities that I'm happy to go into, but maybe I'll hand it back to you. And
well, that was great. Actually, you picked up right on the theme that I want to spend some time on, because if there has been one kind of takeaway or theme from this whole series that we've been doing, it's that we can't apply kind of simple solutions to something as complex as climate change. and that we really need to be able to think across multiple threats and multiple timelines, right? So it really is a challenge to build, capacity to kind of operationalize that whole systems or whole community approach. And so you spoke to a few things that your office does and focuses on, including technical assistance, convening, funding alignment. Let's just pick up on one or two of those that you think might be most, helpful or applicable to a region like ours that is really leaning into, climate resilience.
Yeah, I would start maybe with, there's so many places to dig in. I will start kind of big picture and then drill into a couple things. One is in this year, we are just kicking off an update to the state's adaptation strategy. So I want to make sure that's on everybody's radar. Definitely we'll be sending out additional information for engagement opportunities to help us, shape what that strategy looks like. But one of the things that we have become really clear, I think, over the last couple of years, just recognizing the scale, kind of unprecedented scale of impacts that we are seeing in California, is that we need to, as the state, better articulate a vision for resilience and a vision and guide for what it means when we're driving on climate adaptation. We have done a lot of, I think, great foundational work to understand who's taking action and what state agencies are making investments that support resilience. But I think we've really realized that, we need to create a more strategic framework that can provide a structure and guidance, and then allow also our partners on the ground, local, regional partners, community-based organizations, to understand how does all our work in the more collective fit to and drive towards these goals. So starting there, our update to the state adaptation strategy, we are really, it's ambitious and we're on an ambitious timeline, but really trying to chart a much more strategic approach to how we're thinking about our priorities around resilience. So that is one area of work that we're focused on. A second one that I want to highlight is, and I think this came through going back to the theme of the previous presenters, is we have to also be targeting and make sure we are consistently targeting our work to communities that are the most vulnerable to climate impacts and to the stressors, compounding stressors that climate is going to exacerbate. So one of the priorities for us this year is to jumpstart and kick off an initiative to develop a vulnerable communities mapping platform. And our goal and intent there is twofold. One is there's a lot of existing tools and data out there. Not looking to recreate tools and information that's already out there, but rather we need to bring it together so decision making can be informed in a more integrated way. The second is that we really want to approach this and kind of from the beginning, approach the development of this platform in a more kind of using a more co-production type of model where we're working with communities to understand the vulnerabilities and the factors that are driving vulnerability on the ground and make sure those are really reflected in this platform that we see as a really important and frankly kind of missing piece to our toolbox in terms of being able to target investments and policy decisions that support communities that are the most vulnerable. I'll pause there and hand it back to you.
So a couple of really excellent kind of opportunities. You talked about the state adaptation strategy update and perhaps some opportunity for regions to, share their learnings and, within that process. And then you talked about the vulnerable communities mapping. That's another great project. So let's talk about one thing that's probably on everyone's mind, and that is funding. Right. So a lot of us are tracking you know, the Biden's Build Back Better plan. Over a decade ago, much of the funding from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was funneled through states and in many cases found its way to regional efforts. So what are you hearing, Nuin-Tara? What should we expect, and how can regional partners and collaboratives like ours prepare?
Yes, great question, very big question. I would start with kind of going back to the whole of government approach that I mentioned before, that has been how we in this administration are approaching climate. There is absolute alignment, I think, between that approach and what the federal administration, the approach they are also taking on climate. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity as we think about where we as the state and communities can be preparing to partner with our with this administration, and thinking about where we can leverage funding alignment. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, we're really trying to drive on this whole of government approach. I think in a couple specific areas, there's, you know, Build Back Better. I also want to highlight an executive order, the climate executive order that came out in the early days of the administration. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is the federal government is looking at how investment in infrastructure and facilities will be an opportunity to drive on our resilience goals. And so one of the areas I think looking at that'll be important is looking at some of the transportation funding that may come down the line in terms of both the recovery package, but also potentially, you know, the stimulus package, as well as longer term recovery funding. I want to highlight that the California Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, has been working on and just released a climate action plan for transportation infrastructure, or CAPTI is the acronym. And that is really charting a framework for how the state can use our discretionary transportation dollars to better drive on our climate goals. And I think as we look at the federal transportation reauthorization bill, as well as other federal stimulus, that's an opportunity to think about aligning of the federal and state and then local transportation priorities. Another quick opportunity where I think there's for alignment is around the Governor's Executive Order N8220, which called for our natural and working lands, or the biodiversity executive order. And, you know, that charted a really ambitious goal of 30% state lands and waters conserved by 2030. The federal government has also, through an executive order, the Biden administration issued a similar target of 30 by 30 for federal lands. The governor's January budget includes a significant amount of funding to support those goals. Part of that is also looking at wildfire resilience. So that is another. And then the third maybe isn't quite funding per se, but it goes back to the Vulnerable Communities platform that I mentioned, which is the climate executive order for the at the federal level, also called for a targeting of investments. And they have explicitly said 40%, targeting 40% of funding of federal investments to disadvantaged communities. I think that's an opportunity where California has already been leading in how we've been thinking about identifying priority populations and communities. And that is another opportunity where I think we could inform federal investments as well.
Excellent. You have to hold a lot of acronyms and bill numbers in your mind. And so thank you for sharing all of that and executive order numbers. We have just a time for a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask if you have a question to post it in the Q&A. That's an actual tool at the bottom, not the chat section. It's called Q&A, and I'm going to be curating from that. So, Nuin-Tara, let's talk a little bit about community resilience in our region. I'm going to pick up a question from Craig from the Clean Coalition. About in our region, we have an unusual circumstance where Santa Barbara, like the Gaviota area, is the end of the line for Southern California Edison, and then PG&E picks up, and those two utilities don't necessarily connect. We also have a lot of vulnerability here to wildfire and our lines that run through. So we're at the end of the line, and we're in kind of a risky part of the, and so this is risky part of the transmission lines. This has definitely come up in our conversations about the infrastructure of being resilient. And so the question really is around distributed, how aware is Governor Newsom that true community resilience requires significant levels of distributed energy resources?
Well, you went right, your first question goes right to an area that I will say I am not a subject matter on in energy. So I apologize, I'm not going to be able to answer this question probably as substantively as as you all would like. I can't, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the governor individually, but I think, we absolutely across the administration understand the importance of thinking, how we build a resilient grid and what our energy transition looks like. I will flag that the Public Utilities Commission did last year adopt a rulemaking on adaptation that requires the utilities to develop resilience and adaptation plans and strategies. And so I think I would maybe point the question there to think about, as an opportunity to start thinking about these. But apologies, this is not my subject matter in energy and grid resilience. So
quite okay. I do know that switching gears here, that Governor Newsom does think when we're talking about housing challenges, that he has a clear sense of the nexus between housing and climate. So there's a question specifically around that. Housing is central to individual, family, and community resilience. Aligning housing and work is key to reducing vehicle miles traveled. Wildfires and the pandemic make it clear that housing is a huge vulnerability for communities and the state. And how is OPR centering housing in its climate resilience work?
Yes, great question. This is definitely a priority for our office. And I think the question here hits on so many aspects of the work that is really kind of central to OPR's role. Housing is absolutely a climate issue. It's an equity issue. It's, and it is where we see the intersection of so many priorities coming together. Where our office plays an important role in issuing guidance to local governments on meeting state planning law. One of the areas we have focused on, coming through a number of bills that have been passed by the legislature really since 2015, is how do we better integrate and how do we support integration of climate resilience into the general plan? So that is, and thinking about it more consistently across our planning. In terms of housing specifically, one of the key areas we have been working on is how do we balance growth and development and, land conservation with thoughtful, kind of sustainable community development in a way that is also building resilience. And again, taking that broad view of resilience, that is both resilience from specific climate impacts, so thinking about changing wildfire patterns, and we actually are just about to release updated wildfire technical advice series, specifically looking at better planning on wildfire. But it also is the broader community resilience. So how do we make sure that communities, how we're growing, where we're building and prioritizing affordable housing investments is providing communities with access to resources and economic opportunity. So this is a central piece for our work. And maybe in the interest of time, I will just tee up if Juliette, when she speaks, could maybe touch on some of the insurance and landscape kind of thinking that we're doing in partnership with the California Department of Insurance. Just a flag for her later.
Excellent. Thank you, Nuin-Tara. Nuin-Tara, we have just this one more question, time for one more question. So just a couple more minutes. And I actually want to, you know, from your interactions with us that this group is really trying to think outside the box, right? So we're looking at how do we, knowing that every community is going to be dealing with resilience, climate resilience, and climate threat issues, how do we really kind of help take care of ourselves here? And so this question is back to the funding question. What role can private philanthropy partnerships play alongside public investments in building regional climate resilience in California? This one's near and dear to my heart and a few of us on this team. So any thoughts on that?
Yes, I would say there is a really important role. And when we, you know, I didn't get a chance to talk about it in detail, but one of our priorities is thinking about this funding alignment, and that includes federal funding with state, as well as bringing in private and philanthropic dollars. The scale of need is so significant. We do really need partners working together. So one example that I would give of a successful model is an initiative that is just launching now and getting off the ground, which people here on this session may already know about, but is the California Resilience Partnership, which has received significant seed funding from the Hilton Foundation, which, you know, I think really saw that there was a need for funding for on the ground convening, capacity building, and just creating a space for communities to come together. You know, we could get into state budget nuance here and spend a long time, but you know, that funding for convening, for capacity building is often very hard to come by. And so I think that is a great model of showing where philanthropic dollars can fill a gap, but in partnership and in context of state initiatives, local priorities, and really bringing people together.
Very good. Nuin-Tara, thank you so much. Really appreciate anytime you and I get a chance to talk. I really appreciate it. I come away having learned a number of things. I am going to hand it back to Sharon, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Sigrid and Nuin-Tara, and I so appreciate you taking the time this morning and popping in. I know you came right from another meeting, so we greatly appreciate your time, and I always enjoy listening to Sigrid in these engaging conversations, so thank you both. I am going to bring on Carrie Kappel. She's going to join me for this session, and this is where we're going to actually now look at these top ideas that were generated from our Climate Resilience Roundtable series. I just want to first say a little bit about Carrie because you haven't seen her yet today, but Carrie has been a staple as part of our Roundtable series as a co-facilitator along with Carl. She's also been a co-creator along with Carl and myself and our steering committee team. So we certainly appreciate it. For those of you who've come to past events, you may have remember the beautiful wall-sized data captures that Carrie draws, just stunningly beautiful artwork, but just really capturing the essence of our conversations. So it's really a pleasure to have Carrie. Carrie is also a research biologist with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at UCSB, and she does facilitation, strategic planning, and visioning for CEC and other agencies and nonprofits. So next slide. So we're going to take you into a little exercise room, but before we go there, I wanted to just give you a few examples of some of the top ideas for climate resilience. I did a recap this morning and discussed a couple of them. And I've just pulled out a few more because this is a board that you're all going to go into and participate in just a moment. But I just wanted to kind of break it down for you. So as I mentioned, we collected over 700 ideas, solutions, and values propositions through our Roundtable series over the last 15 months. And you've heard some of that. But these 700 ideas needed to be really pulled down into something that was manageable. I just wanted to let you know that first at each roundtable, there was always a prioritization or upvoting process. So we were able to filter the top ideas with each roundtable. And then we worked with our steering committee and other leaders to do some what we call sense making of all this data. And we sifted through and sorted and created categories and themes. So Carrie's going to walk us through this process, but I wanted to just give a couple quick examples. So what we have here is across the top, we have the 7 categories, and we have community resilience planning and empowerment, neighborhood connectivity, structure, infrastructure and land use, nature-based strategies, energy, transportation and equitable economy, safety net support, and education and communication. And below those then are 20 strategies, and each one of the boxes that you're going to be looking at has that strategy in the beginning. So in the example, the first one, you have inclusive planning is one of those strategies. And then the idea that follows that is that that there be an inclusion of diverse knowledge systems and lived experiences in visioning and planning. And Teresa actually spoke a little bit to this morning of really integrating that Indigenous wisdom and knowledge of management. So that's one example. A second example that we have popped out here is under nature-based strategies. So the strategy here is ecosystem services and looking at regional sediment management programs to ensure that there's sand on the beaches for coastal protection. And then the last just quick example I'm popping off here is under the safety net support category under health and wellness strategy. There is an idea of a comprehensive whole community wellness support system for mental health recovery post-disaster. This is really an important element. I think many people are still feeling the trauma of our fires and debris flows, and it doesn't just go away. And so this is really, I think, an important theme that came up throughout our roundtable discussions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, and she is going to prompt us on how to get into this board so that we can actually play around with it and you can look through all the other ideas. I will say there's a lot there. There's 50 ideas, but I think they're well organized. And I think that if you maybe stick to a lane that is most interesting to you, you'll easily be able to get through it. And Carrie will explain how to do that. So I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, Iris, if you could take the slide down, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? And Alan, if you would also repost the links in the chat. So we've posted 2 links to this interactive board in the chat, one with the cards in English, like you see here, and one with them in Spanish. So you can choose your preference. They have the same information in both, just translated. You can open this up on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. If you open it on your phone, I don't know if you can see this, maybe not because of my background. If you open it on your phone, it will look, it will just bring up one column at a time, and there'll be a pull down menu at the top where you can switch columns. So Sharon reminded you, she showed you that there were 7 different columns here, each in a different category or theme. And you can, if they don't all fit on one screen for you, you can scroll across, make this the whole size, to see the other, to see all of the columns. And each colorful card here represents a different idea, as Sharon said, and they have a header that represents that strategy or sort of subcategory under the theme. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is really to open this up and start to play with these ideas, read through them. I want to show you one thing you can do here. So on each of the cards, you have the opportunity to to upvote it. So if you click on that little thumb, that'll say you endorse that idea, that you like it. And I've given you each 25 votes. So you could vote for as many as half of these ideas and highlight them in their importance. You also can, if you like, add a comment to, it looks like maybe commenting is turned off. I can turn that back on in a moment, but the comment function allows you to add specific suggestions or leads. For example, if there's someone that you think that we should connect with who's already working on this idea. Mainly though, we want you to focus on voting for the ideas that you think are most intriguing. And I invite you, let's not all start at the top left and work left to right and top to bottom. Maybe pick your favorite color or start from the bottom and move up, just so that we make sure that we spread our effort across the board. And we're going to give you 5 to 7, maybe 10 minutes to actually look at this. Well, and I will stop talking so you can read. Okay, I'm going to bring us back now. If you want to spend a little more time with these ideas, the boards will be open until noon today for voting. And then we're going to close voting at noon because we're going to use these cards to inform which topics we bring into the breakout sessions that are happening this afternoon. And thank you to those of you who signed up to continue the conversation with us. We will be taking the top ideas that were elevated by this group and working on those more this afternoon and leaning into the possibilities around how we can start to put these ideas into action. So for now, thank you all so much for your input. Thank you for taking that dive into the ideas. And as Sharon said, we will be sharing all of these ideas on the website as well, and with the materials that will be sent out to you after the webinar. So this isn't your last chance to check them out. So I'll turn it back over. Actually, I'm not going to turn it over. I'm going to do the next section. I hope that you all found that dip into the many good ideas generated by our community and the important shifts that are already underway as inspiring as I did. So much good work to be done by all of us, and so much good work already underway.
Carrie, can you stop screen share?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks.
As you saw, many of the top ideas cut across multiple issue areas, underlining the important message that many of our speakers have already highlighted this morning, that climate resilience is an intersectional issue. The success of tackling these ideas is really going to require the coordination and collaboration of many different entities. And in many cases, a whole new way of working across scales and across boundaries and hand in hand with communities. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our next discussant, Juliette Finzi Hart, to help us chart a path forward toward a more resilient future for our region. Juliette Finzi Hart is the program manager for the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Prior to joining OPR, Juliette was an oceanographer and director of outreach at the U.S. Geological Survey Pacific Coastal and Marine Science Center. Earlier in her career, Juliette was a research assistant professor in the Marine Environmental Biology program at the University of Southern California, where she also served as the Marine and Climate Science Specialist at USC Sea Grant. Juliette has a PhD in ocean sciences from USC and a BA from Columbia University. So welcome, Juliette. It's fun to be in conversation with a fellow marine scientists. Over the course of this webinar, we've gotten a sense for how much we as a community of climate actors learned over this series of climate resilience roundtables. Sharon recapped some of those highlights. Carl and members of the steering committee shared what we've learned about how we should approach building climate resilience. Sigrid and Nuin-Tara's conversation situated our local efforts to build climate resilience within the broader context of state priorities and federal priorities. And Nuin-Tara drew some really valuable links between the kinds of things that are emerging as priorities here in Santa Barbara County and the resources that might be available from state or federal agencies to fund this work. So now we've just looked at our top 50 projects, which cover a significant portion of what we need to do to build resilience here on the ground. In our conversation, I'd love to try to weave all that together and have you help us look forward and think into how we most effectively come together to create the change that's needed based on where you're sitting at OPR. So I would invite you to start. Can you start by just telling us a bit about the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program that Nuin-Tara mentioned earlier, and maybe speak to how we might think about partnering with you as we work to build climate resilience here at the county level?
Yes, can you hear me? I always seem to like triple mute myself. Okay, great. Excellent, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the chance to speak to this group. Just on a personal note, I lived in Los Angeles for 20 years and spent a lot of time at my work at USC and then at USGS in Santa Barbara and thinking about the coastal aspects of all this. So it's really nice to virtually be back in Santa Barbara. So ICARP was established in 2016. ICARP is the friendly nickname for the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program. So ICARP was created basically at a time when climate adaptation was just booming at the state. There was a lot of activity across the different state agencies. And so there was this need to sort of develop this sort of hub for all the activities that are ongoing. And that's why ICARP was created. And so when it was first considered as a program, there were two main items that came out of it. One was to establish a technical advisory council, the TAC. And the goal of the TAC is really to connect local and regional actors from governments to community-based organizations, et cetera, to what the state is doing in the climate adaptation space. And then vice versa, as an opportunity for the state to be able to share where we're headed and get feedback and have conversations and learn from what's happening at the local and regional scale. So the TAC meetings are public. They are quarterly. We have one coming up on March 26th. So please consider this an invitation to join us. So that is the first answer to your question about connecting. In those meetings, we spend a lot of time addressing key topics that are coming up. And just to circle back to what Nuin-Tara was saying earlier, we will be publicly launching the process to update the state adaptation strategy. So you'll hear about the process, the kind of the platform that we're thinking with it, and be able to provide feedback. It'll be the first chance to provide feedback on the priorities. And I just also really quickly wanted to acknowledge there are a lot of fabulous questions, and I can't get to them all today, but we will connect you and address those at a later point. But I did, buried in there, I did point a link. Today is the last day for our first push on the adaptation strategy, which is understanding how communities may or may not have used previous versions. The last one was called Safeguarding. And so we're really using that to help shape how we develop the next one. So there's the TAC, and then the other resource that we develop is the Adaptation Clearinghouse. And that is a place to try to bring all the state resources into one location, so you can see all the different plans that all the different state agencies have, et cetera. And then I think the thing that's the most useful, and the one that we are actively trying to build out, is the case studies, because this is where you can look at individual topic areas or regions or climate impacts and see examples of how other peers across the spectrum, from governments to CBOs, et cetera, right, are thinking about adaptation planning and trying to do it, because we're all creating this as we go. So those are the two big things with ICARP, and then happy to talk in more detail.
That's great, Juliette. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think in our Sea Level Rise Resilience Roundtable, we've actually pointed participants to the Adaptation Clearinghouse as one source of really useful, important information for coordinating efforts across agencies. So I'm curious what you've seen both in those case studies and in your conversations with communities across the state that's really inspiring you. Where have you seen communities succeed at bringing all of this together through impactful or innovative collaborative efforts around adaptation and resilience? Who should we be looking to?
I think everyone. I mean, that's a kind of a cop-out, but it's also the truth. I mean, like I just said, I think, unfortunately, there's no answer yet, right? We are all figuring this out as we go, and we're all learning from each other as we go. Regional kind of work has been, you know, a big focus of conversation over the years. We've tried to figure out, I can speak the best to the coastal zone because that's what I've been so immersed in for years. But, you know, the thinking about how to do planning for sea level rise, for instance, right? We recognize that what one community does is going to have impacts to the community upstream or downstream or up ocean or down ocean from it, right? And so we've recognized that there's a need for regional planning, but that's really quite tricky. And so there's been a lot of great work at that with the various collaboratives. So there, in your part of the world, there's the Central Coast Climate Collaborative. And these collaboratives have been a way for people on the ground to be learning from each other and to understand the best practices within a specific region, because you'll have shared issues. And then through the ARCA, which is, I won't even try to get the acronym right, but it's basically the collaborative of collaboratives working on adaptation. That is also a way to connect back to the state. So we at the state play a liaison role, so we can hear what's happening at the regional level, bring it back, and then kind of have another venue for that kind of cross-pollination. So I think continuing those regional conversations will just bring people together to be able to address all these complicated challenges. The other thing that gives me hope, I guess, is that I think there's been a shift, like a real shift in how we're talking about this. I think in the adaptation world, I think there's always been this understanding that, you know, just talking about climate by itself is not the solution, that there's so much more that's in the conversation, from lived experience, from the challenges that people are combating and winning every day, right, on all the historic structural stuff that's in place. And that's always been in the conversation. For tragic reasons, I now think that is on everyone's mind, and people are really struggling to be like, okay, no, we can't just talk about this anymore. We need to enact this. And this program shows how people are working towards that. So I actually have hope from this roundtable and how you all shifted and, you know, brought in the voices and made sure that it was inclusive, having the interpretation, having the resources put there towards this truly inclusive work.
Thank you.
Those are the highlights. I don't know if that answered the question, but. That's
great. Yeah, and unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you so much for your remarks. And I invite you, if you want to address any of the questions in the Q&A directly, you can type in there, and we'll try to have our speakers answer some of those questions and send out more information in the follow-up. But Juliette, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and for joining us today. I'm going to hand it back to Sharon now.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our final Climate Resilience Roundtable, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on this journey of listening, learning, reflecting, and now hopefully doing. I want to particularly thank our speakers today, Nuin-Tara and Juliette Finzi Hart of OPR, and our steering committee speakers this morning, Chris, Ragland, Teresa Romero. Much appreciation and thanks to Nayra, Pacheco, and Aliz Ruvalcaba on their interpretation today, and a special thanks to Nayra. She has also done all of our Spanish translations on the materials, on the slides and all those top ideas, on notes, and it's been beautiful and skillful, and so we thank you for that. Again, much gratitude to our steering committee. They have been with us throughout this process, and I've said before, they have always been tough. We've come back from a really successful event, and they will always challenge and say, how can we do it better? So much gratitude for these people. And particularly, I want to point out Rachel Couch. She was one of our early design thought partners on these roundtable series, and she's been just instrumental in bringing in really key important speakers. So just a real shout out to Rachel, but to everyone, it's just been a great team to work with. I also can't pass by that Carl Palmer and Carrie Kappel have been such skillful and thoughtful and wholehearted facilitators during this roundtable series. And we thank you so much. And we have so much appreciation for the beautiful spaces that you've provided for our community to come together in respectful dialogue. So thank you for that. Next slide. And of course, our sponsors, Santa Barbara Foundation, California Coastal Conservancy, James S. Bauer Foundation, County of Santa Barbara Sustainability Division, and Sea Forward Foundation have been our sponsors throughout this series. I just wanted to let you know that we will be doing a roundtable opportunity matrix from this one as well. And all these top ideas and themes and principles will, from today's input, will actually go into that. So like we've done with other roundtables, we will have a wrap-up opportunity matrix as well as the recording from the event. So that will be on our website, and you'll get some information as follow-up. Next slide. You can, of course, access our materials on our CEC's website on our climate resilience page. And as I said, there'll be videos and the opportunity matrix and slides and other information from not only this event, but also from the previous events. I also want to let you know that CEC is also going to use this information for our own upcoming climate resilience priorities snapshot report. And this is a way for us to take all this information we've heard from the roundtable series, as well as other things that are just popping all over the place, and really bring that into a report that talks about what's happening now, what needs focus, what are the most immediate threats, what has the community energy, what's the community really calling for, and what needs to be elevated, what needs to be or is not being addressed. So that report will come out sometime in the next couple of months, so be looking for that. Final slide, please. So if you signed up for the breakout groups discussions, that begins at 1 o'clock today. You will be getting a Zoom link for that. For those of you who said yes to that, you'll be getting a link via an email from me, and that should be in your inboxes any minute. But we'll also put that link in the chat. So if you want to copy it and hang on to it for later and then use that link, it'll be a different link than what you used this morning. So yeah, with that, I'd just like to say thank you all again, and we will continue this great work. Thanks. Have a lovely weekend.
Wonderful. A few reminders before we start. Please mute your sound when you're not speaking to the group. Instructions and info you need will be in the chat in both English and Spanish, and the shared Google Doc that we'll be working on today. If you need assistance or have any comments or questions, please post them in the chat. And please rename yourself in Zoom so your full name is shown, so we all know your name, and put an asterisk in front of your name if you prefer to be in a Spanish language breakout room. So today we're using the Google Doc that you'll see. If you're not in it yet, please go to the Google Doc, add your name, affiliation, and that'll get you down. When you enter it, just scroll down a little ways and you'll find that. We'll also work with that document quite actively in our second breakout room a little later. So we really encourage everyone to actively participate in the Google Doc. So the goals of this afternoon's session, we're wrapping up the final Resilience Roundtable, and we're moving into action here. So our goal is to center the series Insights and Principles as we all begin to shift into action on priority projects. We're going to work together to begin the process of co-creating initial project planning outlines and identifying critical needs and next steps moving forward. And I'd invite you all to spend time today reflecting on your individual, organizational, and our collective commitments to this next phase of the work. Some principles briefly for the day. We invite you all to be present, put your phone away, close your email, just focus on being here in this virtual space together. It's not quite the same as being at direct relief in a big room with all that energy, but bring the same focus. We invite you to bring the same focus as if you were there. We invite you, as well as we have all throughout this series, to take off your hat. Takest off thou hat, as Carrie says, your work hat, your affiliations. Show up with your whole self, your whole heart, your spirit, with your grief, with your love for this place. Bring all of that here today. We invite you to stay open, curious, and committed to learning, to listen for understanding, and to speak to be understood, and ensure all voices are welcomed, honored, and heard. That may mean dialing yourself down a little bit if you tend to talk a lot, or if you're a bit more reserved, give yourself a nudge to participate a little bit more so that we benefit from your voice in the room. All right, we have one more key task to do right now. I can share my screen and show you our most recent output from the Climate Resilience Roundtable series. If you're with us this morning, we upvoted a series of projects that emerged from the roundtables. And here are the ones that received the most votes. The link to this new board is being posted in the chat, so you can open it up yourself if you would like. We've numbered each project from 1 through 16. These are the top 16 vote getters. We weren't quite sure where to draw the cutoff, if we wanted one from each vertical or one from each strategy. So we ended up taking all of the ones that scored 30 votes or higher. There's a pretty considerable number of votes for any given project here when you think about it. We had about 140 people in the room at the peak this morning. So some of these got more than 1/3 of the votes. What I invite you to do right now as you scan these is to click on your Zoom window, your little Zoom screen on the 3 dots, and add the numbers of the top 2 or 3 projects that you'd like to be in a breakout group for. So it could be 1, 2, 3, it could be 11, 5, 4, whatever projects you're drawn to. Go ahead now and take a minute and add those in.
So Carl, to be clear, you're wanting us to identify by project number, not by bucket, not by color or bucket number.
Correct, yeah. So just use the project number and that'll allow us to match people up with that box, the green box with the number 9 or the purple box with the number 8.
We're gonna do our best to match you with your top choice, but if we have one group that's really oversubscribed, we'll probably put some folks in their second choice options just so that we can have a good quality of conversation with a reasonably small breakout group for each topic.
Do we put the number in our name or where do we put the number?
Yes, please. Yeah, put the number in your name. So if you just hover over your video, click on your video, there'll be 3 little dots in the upper right corner and then you can rename yourself. You can also do it in the participants list where it says more next to your name.
sort of a personality test of sorts, a Rorschach test. We'll see where everybody lands. Looks like we're getting numbers posted. If you're having trouble with that, anyone having trouble getting their numbers posted to their name?
If you're agnostic about which group you go into, we'll just put you somewhere and I'm sure you'll have a great conversation.
Great.
Carrie, this is Rachel. Are you going to drop this link into the chat as well?
Yeah, I did. I will drop it in again.
Oh.
Let's see.
Yeah, you can put the number before your name, after your name. Don't erase your name. Keep your name. And as Iris said, if you can't rename yourself, just get Iris and she'll do it for you.
There's the link again to the board in the chat now.
Wonderful. Okay, Carrie.
Great. Well, this morning we had such a wonderful sort of dip back into the experience of the Resilience Roundtables, and it's nice to be now in this format where we can see all of your faces. So many of you, such familiar faces to us, people who have been on this journey with us from the very beginning. So I want to just thank you for your commitment to this process and share how grateful I am that this is the group that we're moving into action with, that you all see the need and you are committed to carrying these ideas forward in a variety of different ways. So that's our focus today. And we wanted to just start by giving you a chance to connect with each other one-on-one and share whatever was coming up for you about this morning. In particular, reflecting on the prompt, how will the insights that we gained and the principles that we forged over the last 15 months in this series shape you personally? How are they shaping how you take action, or how are you thinking about carrying them forward in your own work or in collaborative work that may be ahead for all of us? So we're gonna put you into just pairs to share for a couple minutes. You'll each have about 2 minutes to just share what comes up when you think about what we've learned and how that's shaping how you take action. And if you are not speaking, your job is just to listen, not to respond or add to what the other person has said, but just to drink it in. And then it's your turn to share. And these will be quick, and then we will come back together and move into the next portion. I'll just reflect as we're waiting. I think there were really strong and beautiful threads woven through the themes this morning around centering equity, building our local capacity, really empowering all of those leaders who we know are out there, and learning from each other, learning from all the diverse ways of knowing this place we bring to the table, and forging new collaborative ways to be moving into action together and learning as we do that, learning by doing. There is a lot of energy around working at the intersections to develop whole system solutions and all communities solutions. And I'm excited for us to dig into the ideas that got elevated today, because so many of them really require that kind of whole systems, all communities thinking. The other piece that I think is exciting for all of us to dive into is just how do we get started? Where are the partners? Who should be at the table? So that I think is in the back of all of our minds. It looks like now we're ready to join our rooms. So again, this is an invitation to connect and share how the principles and insights from working together over this last year are shaping how you are moving into action now. Thanks. Click that blue button to join your room. Welcome back, everyone. Those were short but sweet, I hope. It's nice to connect one-on-one. I'm going to turn it back over to Carl now. I'll ask folks, though, to please, if you're not speaking.
And Iris, maybe you could mute everyone since we have a little bit of background noise.
Stage all that now I'll have to sort of the ones of us like the half tones. Like a half total.
Iris, it sounds like there's a little background noise where you are actually. Thank you. Carrie, would you, Iris is going to be putting together those breakout groups. So we don't need the slides right now. I can just talk through what we're going to do next, but if you'll take over the slide share, that would be great. Wonderful. So now, welcome back. We're going to invite you all to a project planning breakout group. Each one will have a brave volunteer from our steering committee who has stepped up, or from CEC who has stepped up to facilitate a breakout group. And what we're going to do together is we're going to work through a basic project planning framework. Now is the point in this process where all this collective energy and effort is shifting into action. We've identified top priority projects. We've really clarified how we want to work together. And now the question is, how do we activate these projects? How do we get them in motion? How do we get to this good work done so that we can achieve the direct results that we're looking for and simultaneously build capacity to collaborate more and more on the things that matter most, big, challenging, difficult projects and opportunities. This is going to be a quick pass planning exercise. So we're not going to get to a plan, obviously, in the next 30 minutes or so, but with a small group of like-minded folks, people from all different parts of our community, all different sectors, you're going to have a chance in a breakout group to move through a rapid first pass at filling in a planning framework. Our goal is to gather ideas and insights about these projects, how they can move forward, to elevate key needs, resources, and learnings that may apply across all these projects that can better prepare us then to move into action. So each group has its own section of the notes document. When we're inviting you all in, I think for this exercise to be successful, this is an experiment, we really need your active participation. And we'd love for you to be in the Google Doc, to be entering ideas and thoughts in the Google Doc alongside of your facilitator who will be taking notes as well. Note that in the Google Doc, there's a link there where you can click on your group's, click on a bookmark that'll take you to your group section of the shared notes document. Just above that is a list of all of these projects, and you'll need to grab your project name and description off of that list and bring it down with you. It's a little bit of the Wild West right now. We jumped out of the last webinar. We left voting open for a little while. We figured out which projects made the cut, these top 16. We're seeing which ones now have attention and energy. Iris is working feverishly behind the scenes to put together these breakout groups. And so we're doing this on the fly, and we're really grateful that you guys are with us on this, on the journey. So you will have a facilitator in the room to help guide the process, and they have an instruction sheet. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And Iris, I'll just check in with you. How are you feeling? Are you getting close to having breakout groups?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, wonderful. So Carrie is showing the framework here. Carrie, can you make that full screen? It's a little difficult to see. And will you just jump down now actually to one of the groups? And then we can see Carrie. So Carrie's clicking on a bookmark here for group 1. So this is the project planning framework that we're going to ask you to work with in the Google Doc. And together, what we'd like you to do is just jump in here and start to work on articulating an answer to these key things. How do you begin to think about your project goal? What about a project description? Can you describe it in a sentence or 2? What's the pathway forward for this project? What first steps could you envision? How could the project be phased? You know, really importantly, who are the partners and the funders that might be key to this project? Who needs to be involved? What roles are critical for success? Is this a complex collaboration that might require facilitation? Is there a need for a project manager, someone who's solely focused on this, who keeps track of all the details and herds all the cats? How will you think about centering equity? We're going to really need to focus on this. We're going to need to be really deliberate about it. Otherwise, we'll fall into the old patterns and traditional approaches, which we know don't center equity. We lack equity because the path that we're on isn't focused on it. What resources are needed? There's a lot of different kinds of resources. There's a lot of resources in this community. There's a lot of resources coming from the state and the federal government. What do we need in order to move forward? And one interesting question that's really present for us in the region and the community now is, what do we need from the state and the federal government? What do we need? What do we need from our regional collaboratives, from the Santa Barbara Regional Climate Collaborative, from 4C, the Central Coast Climate Collaborative? What roles could they play in this project's success? What are some deliverables or outcomes that you could imagine might come out of this? What are the direct results? And what are some of the indirect results too? What kind of capacity might be built from this? What kind of skills will we gain? What will we know? And what will we be able to do that we weren't able to do before? That's the rapid process that we're going to go through. As you can see, we're only going to have about a half an hour to do it. And that section that we just went through, we have about 15 minutes or so to work through. So we invite you all to dive in, and just, if a particular question resonates with you, jump down to it and start putting information in. If you're not in the Google Doc, that's okay. It's not as good, but it's okay. You can unmute and you can speak into the room with your fellow participants, and the facilitator can capture those notes. But see if you can't fill out something for all of these as you move through, and then the facilitator will take you to the next phase, which is thinking about what this all means and what we're learning from it.
All right, I have done my best to give you in your first choice. It's not perfect, but I have 30 minutes on the timer, Carl.
Let's do 30 minutes. Yeah, that'd
Perfect.
be great. And we'll send you some periodic time checks so you know to keep moving along the process. Thank you very much, facilitators. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for jumping in. I don't know about you all, but if you were, if your group was like ours, that was fast, and we were cut off mid-thought at the very end. Really appreciate that. Thank you, my group, for an excellent conversation. What I'd love to do now is invite room facilitators to share back a top idea, or one or two or three things that the group felt was really important as they started to elevate ideas there towards the end, doing +1s and highlights. I'd also invite you, if you're in the Google Doc, you can scroll through other groups and see what things were +1'd or highlighted. But is there a facilitator who'd like to jump in and go first? If you do, just go ahead and name the project that you were working on, and then share some of the insights, please.
We can definitely start here on our end. We were from group number 8, and we were just talking about, let me just go back here, about just restoring Indigenous access to the use and manage of lands and kind of reducing fire risk and improving ecosystems. When we talked about first steps, this is a kind of a small group of 4. We basically talked about the need to slow down and listen, and to basically not come at it from a point of view of, we have the knowledge, now partner with us, but that we really have to just take the first step to listen. On how this project could be phased, again, there were a lot of highlights of the current work that's happening in state and regionally, that again, just making sure that we're setting up more listening sessions, more meetings, and kind of more knowledge gaining from these tribes and these kind of groups of people. As far as partners and funders, it was all kind of fire focused, partner focused, and Indigenous knowledge focused. And then again, what was critical for success was deep connections, connections not only between the tribes, but also with the people with influence. And the fact that we probably need some sort of ambassador or a deep connection to the community and to the Indigenous groups, basically connecting institutional knowledge with Indigenous historical expertise. And that's, I think, a pretty good summary. We kind of stayed in that realm for a while.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, I'll go. We were in room 1, so we all want more time, by the way, Carl. So I know with last time we kept this working document open, so if folks wanted to go back in, you have the link. So go back to your section and continue to add, because we have some prolific writers and thinkers in our group. So we had the Ecosystem Services Green Infrastructure Master Plan project to restore ecosystems, living shorelines, et cetera. And that, that whole theme got everybody excited. But within that, there's many layers, right? We don't know that there has been such an integrated plan before. You have plans related to the shoreline or to creeks or to land base, but to the integration of it. And also because we saw the word infrastructure really bringing in the human component, the living in the space. So we are also talking about habitat of humans and how we live in that space, the permaculture, the built environment. So how those things all work together. And it's going to take, quite a bit of work to first of all understand if there's anything like this that has been done and what we could draw on. We see this being this master plan, again, being all levels of sea, land, and built environment. Stormwater capture, urban cooling, carbon sequestration, all of those elements that come together. It is really critical that we look at this from a phased approach in terms of we need to bring in Indigenous voices and communities that have a stake and interest early on. And we use the example of San Marcos Foothills, which many of us thought the project was long gone, right? And a younger group of activists come in and keep it going. So this idea that there's young voices that need to be brought into the design of this, not just as old timers just getting in there and doing what we do best, but also then looking at not only the groundswell of activism, but the leadership. Wade Crawford and others, from the resource agencies being able, and assemblymen and senators putting forth bond measures that actually make the resources available, and bringing in kids and educators and collecting stories and wisdom from folks on the ground to see what they really need and want in this and what they could really offer in terms of this Indigenous and homegrown knowledge. So, we have a lot of work to do, and there's much more I could tell you, but I'm going to leave it at that. Just that we know that we need some resources to build capacity to get this going and to bring the partners in early so that we have a nice inclusive approach.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sharon.
Well, I can go next.
Thanks, Sigrid.
Okay, so this was a very fast-paced and excited, energetic group about expanding access to healthy local food. We realized right away that this is a much bigger discussion that food insecurity and hunger are a bigger, more systemic problem than I think most people recognize, and that no one agency or one project can be a solution. So we ended up pretty quickly honing in on one potential project. And that was really more about, to use Abe Powell's word, a humanitarian garden or humanitarian farming. So to that end, we talked about where we're at in the project in terms of whether it's what phase we are currently in. And we ended up really kind of, I think, being more at the kind of beginning phase for humanitarian farming, the humanitarian farming idea. And what that really means would just be an expansion way beyond of like community gardens. So making sure that that people have access to land in which they can work to help grow their own food. Examples that we could learn from, there are smaller models of this type of thing, like a little bit more expanded than community gardens with, say, like Trinity Garden or Oxnard Community Roots Garden. There are other examples around the country, like the Seattle Food Forest. Food partners and funders who could be involved, there were a plethora. You can look at the doc, there were tons of them. I would say that many of those folks are already in some sort of network, such as the Santa Barbara County Food Action Network, and that doesn't need to be the beginning place, but it might be just an efficient place to get started. There's also another network called the Santa Barbara Food Rescue Network that aims to match high-end quality food with agencies that serve those in need. What roles are critical for success? Lots of very tangible things in terms of access to resources like seeds and tools, access to land, obviously, a volunteer labor pool, garden mentors to help gardeners learn, delivery mechanisms like Veggie Rescue, food donors, food recipient agencies like Food Bank or Rescue Mission, and a number of other skill sets like communications, expertise, as well as some structural needs like food refrigerators, or food processing kitchens or community kitchens. Okay, sorry, that just jumped around on me.
Sigrid, just a reminder to slow down a little for the interpreter.
Oh, sorry, Nayra. Just trying to move quickly. How will you center equity? And this was one of the more exciting parts of the conversation about the value and importance of connecting those who are either growing food, such as farmers, with people who need the food, and helping to build direct relationships. So empowering people to grow their own food through access to land, tools, seeds, and et cetera, but really engaging the community directly in their own food production. Resources, I've touched on some of them already. An interesting conversation around where land might come from. And one of those kind of potentials is working with churches and schools that might have extra land or might have more land that they're situated on than they can use. Vacant city plots was another area. What does a project need from government or regional collaboratives? Will not surprise you. We're going to probably hear this theme across the board, but state, federal, or private funding. And then again, you're hearing land. But this was a very generative and exciting conversation, and I thank the team that was involved with it. And thank you too to Abe Powell for when we landed on that particular project idea. Abe really brought a lot to the conversation because this is an area he's spending a lot of time.
Thank you, Sigrid. Thank you, Abe. Don't be shy, jump in.
Group 4 can uplift what they were working on. And I also had a similar experience facilitating this group. They were already at it, just talking about how to streamline, zoning and other, government or bureaucratic processes in order to achieve the greatest alignment of local and regional general plans with our common and shared climate goals. And so some first steps included just generally reviewing, which is already a systematic update with general plans, but to determine, but to add an aspect to determine commonality and which, if any, of these updates would address resiliency issues that we see at the local level. And that's where that local knowledge that was uplifted in earlier, in our session earlier, becomes critical. And to revise new development standards to incorporate the new latest resiliency standards established at local, state, and federal levels in energy sourcing, transportation, and affordability. And of course, one of the topics that was uplifted in earlier session was addressing the vulnerable populations and their need for housing as we continue to grapple our housing crisis, especially in the expensive, sometimes exclusive area of our coast, in the Central Coast. And some partners and funders when it comes to planning for these general plans included a lot of emergency preparedness stakeholders, so flood control staff, FEMA, of course, when we're talking about zoning and different land use management, we have to incorporate LAFCO, and of course SB-CAG as they're critical transportation partners. But what will be necessary, because those are regular stakeholders, is that we need to start including stipends for participation, especially for marginalized populations, when typically their participation involves some sort of economic loss, when they have to take time out of their working hours of an unlivable wage to give us their much needed thoughts. And so some other resources of support that were identified, including, volunteers, continued advocacy, subsidies for, renovations, for retrofitting, because, the city of Santa Barbara has already made that decision to electrify, new buildings, but this also needs to be addressed for already existing buildings. And finally, a topic that was, or an outcome that was highly discussed was just the decarbonization of the building sector for just electrifying and that movement.
Wonderful, thanks, Michelle. I'd love to hear from, maybe it's easier if I call on you. Does anybody want to jump in, or should I call on you?
We could go, group two could go, yeah. Great. I was very fortunate to have Ashley join in as a co-facilitator. We had a great group, the City of Santa Barbara, County of Santa Barbara, representative from Doss Williams' office and Office of Emergency Management. And our focus was on resiliency centers and hubs. And it became clear, we immediately went down the conversation of the nuts and bolts of what it would take to build that hub. But then through our conversation, we realized that the critical goal was to improve the level of service and resources that are available to our community during a disaster. And with the goal, obviously, and the resiliency focus of getting folks back to where they were before the disaster occurred. So we did not do any +1s. I gotta just say that up front, Carl. We failed on the +1 front. We really just focused more on our project goal and our critical project description. So we got there, but it was more through a facilitated or just our conversation. We definitely added a lot of information to the document for future reference, but I think what was real important to our group is identifying what we have now as far as all of the facilities throughout our community, countywide, that exist or have the potential to exist, and what are the essential components that they would need to have in place in order to serve as a resiliency hub. And then make sure that of those facilities that may have the intent and the desire to be there to serve the community, make sure they're fully built out and able to accommodate our community's needs when a disaster strikes. We also talked about who would be in on developing this plan. And not only is it the typical individuals from the city, the county, the community organizations, but who are we serving, and what do they need, and what do they want, and what will they be comfortable going to? So that was an important aspect of bringing in all of those voices at the very beginning as we define and make those centers in place for a later time. Ashley, what else did I miss? Is there anything else that you would like to highlight?
I think you did a really good job. I would just say that, we thought we needed to have a really holistic approach in terms of the resources it provided. But, one of the key issues that Craig pointed out was just the need for energy resilience. And I think, thinking about what that looks like and having sort of like a tiered approach to resiliency with solar, battery, and then looking at things like generators.
Beautiful, thank you.
And I'll just add in, I thought that having Ynez in our group was really helpful because she works for Office of Emergency Services for the county. And having somebody there in that conversation who actually plans these kinds of facilities for a living is really helpful. And I couldn't help but thinking when Alhan was kind of opening up this discussion, it's amazing to have so many voices to participate in the conversation, but at the same time having the expertise there to guide the conversation is really important, just to make sure that at the end of the conversation you're going to have something really useful to the community. So I think that was really important to our conversation, and having that kind of professional expertise was really helpful.
Great, we've got a few minutes left. Garrett and Chris, I think, are the remaining facilitators.
If you don't mind, Chris, I think I'll let you go. We actually ended up doing resilience centers and hubs as well, albeit at a slightly different angle, but maybe Chris would mind taking on a new subject.
Yeah, sure thing. So our project description, or what we were focused on, was climate resilience campaigns and developing a regional coordinated education campaign on climate impacts, threats, and resilience. And we thought to start, you want to center the most impacted and work your way out. That way the language can be framed in a way that isn't exclusive and operates on such a high level to where some folks don't understand. As is the case with spaces like these. Obviously we speak the language so we get it, but the folks that really need it may need it packaged a little differently. Big topic from just where to start. Phasing out is to research and understand, to see how we can reach folks. And is that, that's like, well, what do these people need? Well, before we figure out what they need, why don't we figure out what they know? And then from there, we can start to engage community members to be able to reach the different pockets and all aspects of whatever community that we're trying to reach. Who needs to be involved? Everyone. I mean, climate change affects everyone. That came up a lot in the our first session today. So schools, kids, local businesses, partnering, maybe incentivizing businesses to make more environmentally friendly decisions that will therein make folks that are going there, aware of, or at least impact them as well. Farm workers was a big one. Ag is sort of always in its own sphere, and it is very important to acknowledge that the food on the table, those folks need attention as well. What roles are critical for success, making this culturally relevant and creating opportunities that don't cast such a dark, rainy cloud over what needs to be done. It's like, hey, sea level's rising, and don't just put information out there, give people actions that they can move forward with. How do we center equity? This is it's kind of a tough one because folks are disproportionately affected. So it's making sure that that we're thinking about how others will be affected, being empathetic to them, and not just operating from our own place of being, or most circumstances, physical place. Key resources, interpretation, going back to the language, really important, building trust within communities. That's sort of a complex issue that I think is going to, just needs a lot of attention. Yeah. Project need from government. Let's skip over this. Let's go to really quick actionable things. A big point that came up for us was it is okay to start and adapt start on the process instead of just focusing on planning, because our problems are also evolving. So not just always being in that like, well, we need to figure this out before we do this. It is okay to act. Who must be involved to center equity? Everyone, and in some circumstances, that's not being on social media, that's not sending something in the mail, that's actually meeting them where they are on their lunch breaks, being creative about how we're reaching people. And key steps, something resonates with me specifically, but leadership of youth and inviting kids that will maybe influence their parents, because that's a really easy way to influence folks that may not want to give something a chance. They love and believe in their kids and want the best for them, so allow their kids to hold their hand there as well. Yeah, that's about it.
Beautiful, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, thanks to all the facilitators who dove into that rapid fire exercise, and for all of you for showing up in such a generative way. There's a tremendous amount of output and wisdom and knowledge now down in that shared Google Doc. There's some really...
I was just going to say, Garrett, I know you guys did hubs. Did you want to give a couple pointers on kind of maybe something different you guys came up with?
Sure. So
I'll have to keep it real brief because we're running out of time. So yeah, just a minute or so, Garrett.
Brief. I think, we kind of came at it from a couple different angles. One, looking at existing analysis that's going on, like the climate change vulnerability assessment, to help us identify sites that would help communities particularly in need, but also recognizing that some of these sites that we identify may not necessarily be like government run. So what does that mean if we're partnering with local community leaders and institutions to prop up and manage these kinds of centers? And what does it mean to do it not necessarily from an emergency services standpoint, but from a community building and kind of honoring the local community culture? More of a cultural center rather than one that's just purely for emergency incidents. And I think just continuing to ensure that, the people who are going to be most impacted or most affected, or, would likely be the ones who are most involved, should be the ones most involved, are actually there, and that their participation is equally compensated, like the professionals who get to get paid to do that work.
Beautiful, Garrett. Thank you very much. Yeah, tremendous wisdom shared from each of those groups. Thank you all. And some real commonalities that I imagine you all are pulling out as you're hearing this, but these are all complex cross-cutting needs and projects. There are many partners need to be involved. There's a need for the capacity to bring those folks together and to move these things forward, and that capacity requires funding. Whether that's funding for NGOs to organize, or funding to ensure that people who need to be in the room can be in the room when they are sacrificing otherwise to show up. A lot of insight here about what we already have, the assets, the expertise, the capacity that's in the room right now and in the community. We have a tremendous amount to build on. We have much of what we need. We just need to mobilize it in service of these outcomes. Real insight here too about layering value. Like we want to deliver a resilience hub, but let's also ensure that it delivers cultural value and community building, like you just said, Garrett. Let's do many things. Let's make sure everything we do does many things, because we don't have time to waste and we don't have a lot of spare time, no spare capacity. So let's make sure we're getting a lot of bang for that buck, or a lot of impact for the time and effort. A lot of emphasis on tapping into Indigenous wisdom and many ways of knowing. Lots of insight in this community, and lots of it's not top-down expert type wisdom and expertise and knowledge that we can tap into and expand leadership. I'm feeling really just a tremendous amount of gratitude for what we've gained together through this process, what we've learned, how this session, how you all showed up to it. It shows that the culture that we've woven together, it feels durable, feels like it's ready to shift into action, and that the how of how we're showing up feels really aligned with the need of the moment. So I'm feeling a tremendous amount of gratitude for that, and feeling a lot of hope and optimism. Sharon has a quick litany of thank yous to run through. We thanked everybody earlier. Sharon, what do you think?
I was gonna say, no, Iris, oh, that's perfect. Let's just leave it at that slide, because that's the absolute perfect one. Because I do, the other closing slides were ones we saw this morning, but again, just really want to thank you all for participating in our final Resilience Roundtable. And then this afternoon breakup discussion, which I think was, like Carl said, this was probably one of the richest, deepest ones we've had, and be able to take this and spend some time and actually think about it from these project perspectives is really, really rich for us. And so again, I just great appreciation to our presenters this morning, as well as the facilitators, and again, Nayra and Aliz, for your patience with us as we speak too quickly, but thank you for your interpretation. And then of course the CEC staff, Iris and Alan and Sarah and Lisa, and the behind the scenes folks that have made this happen. And then again, our steering committee, I just can't thank you guys enough. Such a dedicated, devoted team that has been with us from the beginning and has shown up. You know, here we are Friday afternoon after now 3 hours of this. And you guys, we will be continuing to work together, and we'll figure out our paths forward together. We have a lot to do together. And then finally, again, our funders, which we couldn't do it without, but more than that, just greatest appreciation for Carl and Carrie for their absolutely beautiful facilitation and creating spaces for us to have these conversations. And as somebody said early on, I think it might have been Aaron, you know, after the first event, it was like that became our signature. And it was really LegacyWorks and their way of and style of facilitation that really, I think, has promulgated throughout our community, and it's being used in other forums. And I'm just so proud that we were able to spread that. So with that, I just wanted to, again, thank you all for showing up, and we will continue this great work together.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Feel free to unmute and speak into the crowd.
Thanks, everyone. All right, good job.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Connect with you all.
All right.
Bye.
You well, everybody.